Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to the Highly Unlikely podcast today, where we tell the stories of highly unlikely people in highly unlikely places that God is using to do highly unlikely things. And we have an extra special conversation for you today as we talk to some friends whose journey has taken them from South Africa around the world to a small town in North Dakota where they are making a global impact. They're great friends of ours, they're overseers of our church, and we can't wait for you to hear from them today. So thanks for joining us. Let's join the conversation. Well, hey everybody, we are excited today to welcome some great friends to the Highly Unlikely podcast. And today our guests are Doctors Paul and Carol Alexander, and great friends of ours. But I'll let you guys say hello and introduce yourselves.
Yeah.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Just love the whole concept of highly unlikely. It seems to fit the whole gospel message. So I'm Paul, and I'm the president at Trinity Bible College in Ellendale, North Dakota.
Yes, it's wonderful to be with you today. And I'm Carol, and I'm the dean of the graduate school at Trinity in Ellendale, North Dakota.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you.
And I love talking with you guys. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. And every time we get to grab lunch or something, I always look forward to it. And working with you at Trinity as well. And Carol, I always appreciate how insightful you are and the wisdom that you bring to conversations, but also your passion. You're just somebody who, when you do it, you're all in and you're passionate and focused. And I've just loved seeing that. And Dr. Paul, your insight into history and the world and even the times that we're living in. I read the news and I literally think, I wonder what Paul thinks about that. You know, I wonder what he would say. And so we're so excited that you're here. You guys have such an unconventional story, and living in Ellendale, North Dakota, but the accents give you away that there's more to the story than that. And so we're excited for everybody to meet you. So.
Yeah. Well, we just wanted you guys to start off with maybe what led you, how did God lead you to Ellendale, North Dakota?
Yeah.
Well, let me give you the easy part of it, then Carol can perhaps fill in a very specific element of it. Our lives have been very diverse. The accent is predominantly South African, but not exclusively. We both were born there and grew up there, finished high school. Then an opportunity came for us to study in the UK, which we did, graduated, and God began to open remarkable doors for us. We started out in Teen Challenge in New York City in the bad old days.
Wow.
And then circumnavigated the globe, and then through lots of meandering and wonderful opportunities and open doors that God gave us, pastoring churches, a lot of youth work. We ended up leading a dynamic church in Australia, Brisbane, and it was during that time that I think we consolidated our sense of call to the nations. We had planted a great missionary training school in South Africa earlier than that, and our journey into Christian higher education began. And some years later, we ended up being asked if we would serve in leadership at our alma mater, which was the British Assemblies of God University in the UK. We served there. There were some sort of denominational shifts, and after some amazing years, really impacting much of the world, we pioneered some very innovative graduate level studies, which was a great learning curve for us. We had felt progressively that in some way we would end up in the United States, which for a lot of people around the world who wouldn't want to live in America, but it had never been something that we had seriously considered. But our kids had gone to university here, and we would visit from time to time. And almost every time we came back, we were deeply impacted by the rampant secularization of American society. People would ask us, do you think America's more secular than Europe? And for years, the easy answer was, no, of course not. We felt like we would come to America to catch our breath in a way. And then we saw from each coast, from the east and from the west, this radical, dramatic secularization of a nation. And we often say that what Europe did in baby steps from the 1960s onwards, the United States almost did in a decade.
Wow.
And it stressed our society. I think a lot of the divisiveness in our society is just that change came at a pace that people couldn't understand or keep up with. And that heightened our sense of calling to this nation. We just felt that we had something to say to Christian leaders. And we'd had numerous conversations at several institutions, but the deep conviction was that we would serve in leadership in the US. And so when a natural transition opportunity arose in 2012, we just seized that opportunity and relocated back to the US. But there were some specifics, and I'll let Carol fill you in on those.
So we knew we were leaving Madison because we already had some of this trauma in the national leadership, and we knew we would be leaving Madison.
Which was the college in the UK.
Which was the college that we were leading at that time. And one night, late October in 2011, I had a dream. And everybody dreams, and I have crazy dreams as well, where you achieve feats that you'd never achieve in reality. But this dream was so powerful and so based in reality that I woke up and I knew immediately I'd had a God dream. And it was early in the morning. I nudged Paul. I said, wake up, I've had a dream. It was 5 o'clock. He said, go back to sleep, darling. Don't bug me now with dreams. So I couldn't get back to sleep, and it was just going round in my head. And there are times when you've had a dream like that or something, a thought or a vision, you need to articulate it. And it was going round in my head. I needed to talk it through. So we came back at lunch, and I just put my head back on the couch and I said, God, if this dream is from you, please tell me what it is. And all God said to me was, it's your next position of ministry. And it was a dream about me. Paul and I were in a car, and sitting in the car, I suddenly became aware of something on the back seat, looked, turned around, and on the back seat was a dead baby. And I immediately turned around and I looked at Paul. I said, the baby's dead, it's dead. And we were both weeping. And then something inside of me in my dream said, turn around again and touch the baby. And I did. And I felt like I was touching death, but as I touched the baby, it stirred. And I shouted, it's not dead, it's alive, it's alive. And I picked up the baby and nurtured it and woke up from my dream. And the God said to me, that's your next position of ministry. So being that we were Africans from Africa, I thought, I wonder if we're going to go back to the college that we pioneered there. And our college had spawned many ministries amongst AIDS orphans and done incredible things. And I thought, I wonder if we're going to do a dead baby, wonder if we're going to go back. And we had many invitations, nothing lay comfortably with us. And then we got back to the States in 2012, early 2012. We had a call from a little place in Ellendale, North Dakota, Trinity Bible College. Will you come and do some lectures for us? And there was talk of a vacancy and the possibility of filling that role. And I just said to Paul, oh, no way. I said, where is this place? Mm-hmm. And he got a map, and I looked and I couldn't see it, so I got a magnifying glass, and then I still couldn't find it. It was a pinprick, this little place called Ellendale, North Dakota. And I said to Paul, God's a clever God. He would never take us from the center of Europe to a remote little place like that. And apart from that, my prayer had been, well, God, when we were so faithful to you in the UK, and next place, please, Palm Beaches, blue sky, ocean, that's Hawaii. But if it's not Hawaii, I'm happy with California or Florida. So I put in my bucket list with Jesus, and I knew he was going to listen to me. So why waste our time on going and doing? Well, we came. And the first couple of meetings, I thought, wow, this place is really dead. We'd been used to a very vibrant college with a vibrant student body and worship, and I didn't see that in our first couple of meetings. But when we preached, the students responded incredibly. And then some of the board said, could they meet with us? And we went into a little room and met with them. And one of the board looked at us and he said, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, we were honestly thinking of closing Trinity. He said, we wondered, had the baby died? And I thought, I've heard that before. And then he used words that only I had used in articulating my dream. He said, but if somebody would pick it up and nurture it, we believe that it still had life in it. I could not believe what I was hearing.
Wow.
You telling me my dream in my words, and I've only shared that with 3 people, and they all live in the United Kingdom, and I know you don't know them.
Yeah.
And when he said that, it just, my heart, I knew in my spirit this was where God was calling me. And, you know, it wasn't what I wanted from a natural perspective, but I know my God well enough to know that if he thinks it's good for me, it's going to be very good. And so even there and then, I bowed my head and I said, Jesus, if this is you, I want your will, I want your way. And I bowed my head right then and said yes to Jesus for Trinity.
Wow.
So I didn't get the white beaches, but I got lots of white snow.
I love that.
Yeah, needless to say, the seafood in North Dakota is not fresh, right?
No, it is not.
You're a little ways away. I actually came to Evangel in 2011, and I remember that fall someone having a conversation and saying, we're just waiting for the call that Trinity has closed its doors.
Yeah.
And it was like imminent almost, you know, and I wasn't real involved at that time to know that you guys were even, you know, that you had come then the next year and all the things that God was doing. I got involved later. But, you know, part of the talk is talking about how God does highly unlikely things. And so people are slow to talk about the accomplishments, but would you just tell people, what has God done since you've come? You know, over the last decade, can you rattle off some of the victories that you've seen and where the college is at today? I think it's important for people to know that and hear that.
Sure. Well, it is, of course, an unlikely place and remains an unlikely place. I've often said if I were God, I probably wouldn't put a key institution in a small North Dakota town. But it is a very biblical concept. It was out of Nazareth that God called his own son. And so we take great comfort in that overall biblical narrative. Because of the story, we knew that God had sent us, and I think God protected us, but it was as though every day there was some new revelation. I had a nice gentleman come and see me. I thought he was welcoming me to the town and these nice North Dakota people. And as he left, very sort of shyly, he said, well, just have to tell you there's no propane left in any of the tanks, and I'm not authorized to deliver because the bill hasn't been paid. And I said, oh, do we owe you money? Thinking maybe a couple of $1,000s. He said, yes. I said, how much? He said, $62,000. And as we started to get a comprehensive picture, we realized just how bad the situation was. We should have really gone in and turned off the lights. And I'm not sure that I can tell anybody that we strategically went through point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think our strategic plan at the time was to get to Friday. It was just to keep the lights open. But God began to send us amazing friends, just wonderfully faithful people. A friend of all of ours, Winston Titus, and his wife, Candace, came alongside us. They determined that they would try to pay local vendors first, but it just kept mounting up. And we came finally to the realization that the debt burden was many millions of dollars, that there was a huge deferred maintenance issue. And if that wasn't bad enough, we had gone through some really traumatic experiences with our regional and our national accreditors. And we were under probation, which I don't think I fully grasped just how bad that is. It's almost a death knell. It's you got 3 years to turn this around, and we don't think you will, is really the kind of language. But we set our hearts. We felt God had called us. We were determined to see things change. And so we were able to restructure the finance, which did nothing more than buy us a few extra months of time, but slowly changed the narrative. And I think that was a primary call on my life as president. I needed to tell the story, because the story of unlikely people doing unlikely things in unlikely places needs to be told. It's not just something that people presume. And I remember telling it with some leaders. They said, oh, yeah, Trinity's closed, right? I said, no, sir, Trinity's not closed. Oh, of course it's closed. I said, no, it's not. And the third time around, I'm the president. I can tell you it's not closed. And telling that story again and again and again started to bear fruit. We also felt that we had to be really committed to serious integrity. And I think a story that stands out was a fairly forthright letter that I received from somebody that I didn't even know we owed money to. It was a short-term kind of payday loan. There was no supporting correspondence, so it came as a surprise that we owed this money. But the tone of the letter suggested to me that somebody had become really offended by our tardiness in replying. And so I said to Winston, you've just got to give me a check. I know we can't afford it. And with great pain, we signed a check for $5,000. And I'll never forget the letter I wrote. I enclosed it. I said, please forgive us for not responding earlier. Enclosed, and these were my exact words, is my earnest of a commitment to fully repay you what we owe you. And I sent it off. About 10 days later, I got a letter back with, and in the top left-hand corner of the envelope was his address, and my heart sank. I thought, this will come back far too quickly. He's probably threatening legal action, or he's even more offended now. And so I went down to my office, I opened it, and I know I was trembling, and out dropped our check. I thought, oh no, this is real bad news. He's sending it back saying, don't offend me with such a small response. And I opened the letter, and it said, thank you for your kind letter. We are returning the check, and we're canceling all of the debt.
Wow.
And it was a kind of a catalyst, really. You know, when I think back now, in some ways, monetarily, it wasn't ginormous, but for us, it was just as big as it could be. I fought back the tears. I still do. Yeah. And I know that something shifted in the heavenlies. By the end of that year, I still cannot tell you how, but we had paid off every open invoice, which totaled well over $700,000. And through a combination of just our hard work and debt forgiveness, we had another $750,000 of short-term debt eradicated. So that was $1.5 million. Just the scope of that miracle in a small town from a dying college was immense. But it gave us courage. It filled our sails, and we began to believe God for many more things. And now, 10 years later, which is exactly is, we have had multi-million-dollar projects. We've concluded several huge building programs, nearly $20 million, in fact. We have paid off every last dime of the debt. We have no debt at all. We carry no line of credit through the summer, which is unusual for most schools that are dependent upon short-term credit. We have seen a dramatic change just in the kind of student that we recruit. We're unashamedly Bible College, and we have got Bible College students. And then in addition to that, we've been able to establish graduate programs that are now literally attracting students from around the world. We taught a cohort just earlier this week, 5 different nations, 11 different states, and I think the total student body represents 17 different nations and almost every state of the union that are now being served from this little pinprick in North Dakota called Ellendale.
Amazing.
So that's the big picture, the overall story.
Love that.
One of my favorite stories that I've heard you tell about that is right now at Trinity Bible College, there's this beautiful building that stands in the center of the campus, right? Massive building, large pillars. I mean, when you drive up, you see it. And it's called Davidson Hall.
Correct.
And I know for a while it wasn't a beautiful thing that you would drive up and look at. And I remember you saying that building haunted you.
Sure.
Right, for a while. And it almost feels like that building was emblematic of everything God has done at the school, because the building, I mean, was it closed, condemned?
So the day we arrived was a cold winter's day in January 2012 when we were being shown around. And as you say, it is an iconic building. It was one of the buildings built when the campus was part of the University of North Dakota. And I looked up and I asked the gentleman showing us around, what is that? And he kind of hung his head. He said, well, it's no longer occupied. It was our main women's dormitories. And it had been condemned. And then on top of that, to add sort of insult to injury, there'd been no heat in it for 3 years. And so the basement had shifted because of frost, and the bottom walls had started to cave in, and the building had dropped back about 6 to 9 inches on its own foundation. So it was really condemned. But I remember looking up at those pillars, and if we talk about unlikely things, I hope this doesn't sound too spooky, but it was like those pillars mocked me, and they said, this is what this place is. You don't want to come here. This is us. We're dead. We're done. And something happened on the inside of me. It was like these fists clenched in my belly. And I remember looking up, and in my mind, I spoke to those columns, and I said, if I come, and I think by that stage we knew we were going to come. We were going to be a living, walking defiance of the rot and the death that had set in. I said, we're going to get you back 1 square inch at a time. And I had no idea what that meant. And in my sort of naivety and ambition, I thought all we need is a lick of paint and clean things up a little bit. But it just turned into a huge project. We discovered that we had to bring in massive hydraulic jacks, and we had to literally jack the entire building up, bring in 18-inch I-beams that could take thousands of tons of pressure, and we had to wheel those in. And then every floor, as we went up, we had to jack every floor up. And at times, it just seemed like it was too big a project. We ran out of money. It just stood as a shell. But I'd walk through there every day. I showed people what I saw in my mind's eye. And if you were to come on our campus now, it is an extraordinarily beautiful building. Mm-hmm. We put 7 miles of data cabling into the place. We put in brand new HVAC from top to bottom. And it is really a state-of-the-art central administration building. We connected it into the other buildings, so you never have to go outdoors. And it just, to me, that speaks tangibly of the incredible goodness of God in fulfilling his promise to us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. I think of, when the Israelites are about to cross over into the promised land, they kind of build an altar and, they worship God and they remember everything that he's done. And I just pictured Joshua with that kind of a conviction in his belly of like, we're going to do this, Sure. And then crossing over and conquering these lands and leading people to a place Moses never did.
Yeah.
And I hear your story of your dream and, you speaking to pillars and dead things like, no, you're going to be alive again. And I think that is so, I know for us, when we decided to lead Evangel, when we felt like God was really telling us this is it, there was a moment like that for us too, where there was like something inside of us. And even now when there's challenges, it's like, you can be defeated, you can be knocked down, but there has to be something about it where there's just a resolve and like a no, I will fight. And I would just love for you guys to talk about where does that come from, or why does that happen? I think there's a lot of people that can look at your story or our story and say, well, sure for them, but maybe not for me. But I think we believe that there's moments like this that can happen in everybody's life. Absolutely. Where God uses them to do unlikely things. And I don't know, do you have thoughts about that, about what happens that causes us to move forward in that way?
Well, I'll defer to Carol, because I'm sure she can speak to this. But the reality is it doesn't all happen in one big moment. Right. It's just doing life. Yeah. It is the fruit that, it is absolutely believing that the fruit of what Jesus does in our lives, in the simple act of surrendering our lives to him, becomes foundational for everything. It makes us passionately believe that we are no longer destined just for the ordinary, that life can come at us, but that we can come back with God's help. And so I could tell you hundreds of stories of the small, the almost incidental, but line upon line, precept upon precept. And so I think I don't know if you want to highlight just one of those examples.
Well, I just think that leadership is extremely challenging. And I think that, as I reflect back over our lives, all the choices that we made as young people are what we're living today. So when we confronted challenges there were choices that we had to make. We were in a church, a rather large church in the UK, where we were treated unfairly and unjustly. And I think we just determined from that treatment, we would never, ever treat young people like that. It was, you've seen what it's done to you. It could have broken you, but we made some choices then. And so I think a lot of where we are now are choices we made in those difficult decisions, in those difficult, challenging times of life. We made decisions and choices based on those. So, you know, I remember one particular event when we were traveling the world, preaching the gospel and living completely by faith. I remember I was in my room one day and I felt God say to me, if you can't trust me for the little things, you'll never trust me for the millions that one day you will have to trust me for. And I went to Paul, I said, you know, God's going to lead us into something where we're going to have to trust him for millions. And Paul just looked at me. I think by then he knew he'd married a different kind of person. And he looked at me. But it was those kind of small little, those little events. Like I remember we were traveling in a car one day and we were saving our pennies, and it was an old car, and we were eating cheese and bread. And I said to Paul, I feel so uncouth breaking bread and breaking cheese. I said, I wonder if we can ask God for a knife. And he looked at me and he said, I think we could. So I said, I just prayed a simple prayer, Lord Jesus, provide us with a knife. And we stayed with an old couple that night. And as we were leaving, they waved us down and said, wait. And he came running out of his garage, and he had in his hand 2 things in his hand. And he came up to us. He said, as you were leaving, I felt the Holy Spirit tell me to give you this. And in his hand were these picnic sets with a knife, a fork, and a spoon, a knife and a fork and a spoon. And I looked at Paul and I said, see, he does exceeding abundantly above what we ask or think. A knife, a fork, and a spoon. And it was those. So I've never ever, I still get excited at small miracles. When a student shares they needed $5 and they got it. I'm as blessed at that as I am at our $100,000 million miracles, because it's the same God who meets those needs. And it was those little baby steps, I think, that helped us, and enabled us in those difficult situations to push through and say, I've seen God. The one thing I know through every challenge in life, every single challenge, the one thing at the end, I've always been able to look at Paul and say, I serve a good God, and he's kind and he's faithful. Mm-hmm. And no matter what challenge we faced, I've been able to look at him and say with everything in me, no, I serve a good God, and he's kind and he's faithful, and he will see us through this. And I think you just get that grit and determination from this walk you've had with a faithful, good Jesus that's seen you through.
Yeah.
And I think although vision has obviously characterized so much of our lives, vision is quite temperamental. You can lose vision circumstantially quite quickly. And I think we learned through a lot of experiences early in our lives that values are much more important than vision. When our kids were very young, I was conscripted into the army, sent off to the Angolan Bush War, and we had to forge deep, deep convictions about life. 20 years ago this year, we very nearly lost our son in a horrific motor accident. It defined so much of our lives, but we looked back and we realized that we had made the big choices. We had made the decisions. A little bit like Job, we could say, even though he slay me, yet will I serve him. Mm-hmm. And I think that the ultimate concept of the God of grace and kindness and goodness, doing unlikely things in unlikely places, showing up, it's actually a theology. It's actually a God concept. As Carol was saying, we've proven his kindness. Mm-hmm. I think we can put our hands on our hearts and say, God actually shows up in what we would have called God-forsaken places. And so deep values like caring for the poor, understanding what compassion is, those things, you don't often articulate them, but you draw from them as you journey through life. And so doesn't happen. It doesn't happen overnight, but faithful in the small things will result in God doing remarkable things over a lifetime.
Yeah.
I love that, and I love the concept of values matter so much more than vision. And I think of, even if we have a lot of next generation listening to this too, or I think of vision boards and, in a new year, or things that really they're focused on and painting their picture of their future. How did you guys decide on your values? Like, what led you to that? Was it through scripture alone? Was it through mentors and advisors in your lives, or just really conviction in your hearts? Maybe more the practical side of how did you get to your values?
We fell in love as teenagers, and we've been kind of co-mentors. I think that's been a huge part of our lives. We've been married 46 years this year. And so I think we've held each other really accountable. But then I think as well, just the reality of life. It's easy to track the high points, but for every high point, there are challenges. There are those deep moments. And you've got to make some deep, strong convictions. And one of those is that values are more important than vision. Another one would be that people are more important than programs. So I think it's hard to define exactly how those have slowly mutated and grown into our lives, but we were determined to honor Jesus. We want to lead upright lives. We held each other accountable, and I think those, as we were able and given the benefit of adding, if you like, theological thought to support those, we found, everything we've learned about God supports exactly that reality, that we need to be people who can be simply trustworthy, counted on, showing up on time, which all seem somewhat trivial, but they come together in a composite picture of trustworthiness, which I think is probably one of the primary characteristic that God looks to if he's going to entrust us with unlikely things. And so we sometimes think of the miracle, but I think the miracle is almost always the end product of a process. It never just starts and finishes with the miracle. There is preparation. I don't know how else we developed values. If you asked us what are the top 10, we probably wouldn't just easily list them. They're much more kind of gut things, deep convictions. And we know it because we feel the emotion of those values when we try to articulate them.
Yeah, I think, when we got married, we had certain values, but I think that they get reinforced through the challenging times, and you become more determined to live by those values. And you realize in the challenging times that it's those values that are going to carry you through.
Yeah.
So
that's so good. I love that.
I agree. I always think it's no wonder in our lives that the season of promotion that God allowed in my life in 2014 was tethered to getting married to Jenaye, because I knew when you brought up values that she was going to bite on that question, because it's something that has been so important to us. Because really we all have values. I have values, but Jenaye is so anchored in, who we are is going to be who we are, not just that we're going to say we are something, but we're actually going to be it, and we're going to embody it. And
so a story I sometimes tell is we built a beautiful home in Australia, and we designed it and had a lot of fun. But we realized that there was a bit of a design fault, because we put the fridge pretty much as you came in from the main hall into the big kitchen and family room. And so having a young teenage son, he'd inevitably go to the fridge and fill up a glass of milk or whatever, and had to check, that that he tested the bounds of the laws of gravity, and would always overfill the glass. And inevitably somebody would come through and bump into him, And the question is, so if you bump into somebody with a very full glass of milk, what do you get? And the answer is you get milk, and you get a lot of it. But the challenge came to me, what happens when people bump into us? What do they get? What are those first initial reactions, responses? And that's the strongest indication of values, that we become less reactionary. We become far more tempered in our dealings with people. We love through all situations. Values are what will determine that. And ultimately, not only will that be what our ultimate reward is based upon, because we are rewarded, the crown of righteousness is ultimately for faithfulness, not for achievement, but it also incredibly enriches and enhances lives. And I think it's in that context that you see God show up and do unlikely things through unlikely people in unlikely places. Exactly.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Well, I think I want to end this way, because you can have a conversation about God doing unlikely things and think, oh, we've arrived. He's done it. But one thing I know about you is you're like another person from the Bible, which is Caleb, in that we've conquered this mountain, we've seen God work, and now God, give me the next mountain. And so I'm wondering, what are the things that are still in your heart, the unlikely things that you'd want to share that you're believing God for still today as you go forward?
That's easy. I think as we sort of dig back into those early senses of a call to America, not only have we seen a dramatic change in our cultural milieu, but in our circle of churches, both denominationally and beyond, we realize that we have reached, I think, a critical juncture. Many of our smaller churches do not have pastors or leaders, and there's nobody in the pipeline. And many of our churches that do have leaders have got people who are incredibly discouraged, coming off the back of whatever COVID is and whatever it's going to deliver to us. It's really challenged a lot of our mindsets about what does church and the body of Christ look like. And so Carol and I are asking God just for as many high energy years as we can possibly muster, with a determination that somehow we can be part of the solution. We're not going to be it, we're going to be a part of it, but I think that we're well positioned with the tools that God's given us in the academy. And currently in our world, globally, there are still few tools as well tested as good learning tools. I wouldn't want to be sick if we trained our doctors the way we sometimes train our ministers. I think that we have to use the tools of academia, and we do that both undergraduate and graduate. But there's one objective, and that is to release a tidal wave of passionate, informed, capable women and men to serve the body of Christ, particularly in this troubled nation of ours. But we feel very privileged to be able to do it globally as well. So that's the mountain we want to conquer. To a slightly lesser extent, it is that when we do eventually move to another form of life and ministry, that we leave behind in this little place called Ellendale a resilient college that can continue to serve for generations to come. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say my passion is pretty much the same. Jesus transformed my life as a 13-year-old, and then I saw that transformation in all of my family's lives. And I think my deepest passion is, Lord, enable us to send more men and women. Every day we pray for a harvest of young men and women to go into this world, very broken world, a beautiful world because it's God's world, but a very broken world, and that the students that we impact, that are impacted in our chapels, that are inspired in the classroom, will go out and make a difference in people's lives, in communities, see broken homes put together again, broken marriages restored, and that this amazing message, this incredible transforming message of Jesus would go into every part of the world. And we still, I'm passionate about that, and I still believe that it can happen in our lifetime, that we can release an army of men and women from the state of North Dakota to change the world for Jesus. So, yeah.
We're in that together.
Say we
Yes,
agree.
absolutely.
We're in together. Amen. Yeah.
Hey, thank you guys so much for
Privilege.
taking the time and for
Been
sharing.
a huge privilege.
Yeah, such incredible insight, and we're grateful for you. And in many ways, looking up to you and following your lead, and appreciate your heart for our state and for forsaken places. I just love hearing that, and God restoring things, and so very, very grateful for you. And I hope your story inspires others.
Yeah,
We
I was
hope
just
so.
going to say, every time we're with you, I leave being inspired to serve Jesus more faithfully, to grow, even like we were talking before we started recording, and I said, I think I need to read some more books. But it's an inspiration in a good way of, just love watching your lives and listening to what God's done through you, and are inspired by it.
You humble us. Thank you.
Yes.
We're grateful for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the conversation, and we'll see you next time.